When we first looked at objects in this course, we saw how we can assign properties, but we did not discuss methods. Methods are functions assigned as object properties. Again, they are simply functions that we assign to an object rather than a normal variable like we saw before. For review, here is a basic object with a few properties. You could see the properties being assigned here as well as logged out down below like post.title. Now, here's an example of an object with a method. Remember, a method is nothing more than a function assigned as a property. The only thing different here that we saw with the function expression is that rather than using an equal sign to assign it as a variable, we're using the colon, which is used to assign values to properties and objects. Now, if we wanted to call our method, we would use the dot notation just like calling any other property, and we would use the parentheses just like calling any other function. We could also assign a method using the dot notation as well. What we have is the exact same code we saw before, except we're defining this function outside of the initial object declaration. Some people prefer to write their methods in this way because it can look a little cleaner and prevent the initial post object from having a whole lot of functions buried within it. For now, there's not too much more a method than this. It's simply a function like we saw before, but it's being saved as a method property instead of a variable. We can also pass parameters to and return values from a method just like a normal function. Here, we have a method called getTitleMarkup that accepts a parameter of tag that's used to define what HTML tag our post title should be wrapped in. At the end, we return all of this markup so that we can assign it to a variable down here and log it out. Notice when we call our method, we're using again the dot notation, first calling the object to which the method is attached, and then the method itself, and in this case passing in h2 as our parameter to be used as the tag in the function. Now when we call our function, it will return the markup, save it as title HTML, which we can log out here. Again, this is very similar to what we saw with normal functions. In fact, there are no real differences at this point. However, there is one very important difference, and that involves the keyword this. We will explore this more later, but for now, let's look at how it works with methods. What we see here is an example we already looked at earlier. It's a normal method being assigned using the dot notation fashion. However, when we log out the title, instead of writing post.title, we're writing this.title. When we log this out, we could see that we are in fact getting the post title as we would expect, so we can correctly infer in this example that this in a method refers to the object to which it is attached. In this case, this is going to be equal to post. This allows us an easy way for a method to have access to the object and all of its properties, and it gives us an incentive for assigning a function as a method so that it can get access to all of the information the object contains. Let's look at one more example before we close out. In this example, we have a link building method that uses the keyword this to get the value of the post slug and the post title. Notice that because this is a method attached to the post object and it's using the keyword this, we do not have to pass in any parameters when we call the function, because the function, or method in this case, is smart enough using this to know the other values of the post itself. If we were writing this as a normal function, we would have to get all of those variables and likely pass them in as parameters when we call the function. I will warn you that this gets more complicated as we proceed, and we'll come back to looking at it later in a more advanced section. However, For now, it's helpful to know that we do have this at our disposal when we're working with methods. When we log this out, we can see that it puts everything together just as we would expect. However, it does try to escape a few things here because of how JSBin's console is trying to put all of this information together. When we get into the next section and we start looking at the DOM and events, we'll find that this type of code works quite well, and we'll be able to go even a step further and begin manipulating and applying our functions, objects, and everything else that we've learned to the actual content in the browser. At this point, I would suggest you play around a little bit with functions and methods on your own before proceeding to the next section.